The popcorn scent should have been the first warning. It was too sweet, cloying, almost meaty, with an undertone of stale grease and something else. I couldn't place a metallic tang like old coins, but I was too wrapped up in my own petty misery to pay it any mind. It was a Tuesday night, and I was at the cinema alone. A ritual I'd adopted after my girlfriend, Clara, had decided she needed space. Space, it turned out, was a one-bedroom apartment with Dave from her yoga class. So Tuesdays became my night. A stubborn declaration of independence that felt more like a sentence. The grandiose theater was a relic, a once opulent movie palace from the 1920s that had been carved. Up into a multiplex in the 80s, its soul partitioned but not entirely extinguished. The main lobby still held echoes of its former glory. A vaulted ceiling with water-stained frescoes of cherubs and muses, a grand staircase with a moth-eaten velvet rope, and a dusty chandelier that hung like a forgotten chandelier of a forgotten dream. It was never busy on Tuesdays, which was the point. Tonight, it was particularly tomb-like. The pimpled kid at the ticket booth barely looked up from his phone, and the only other soul I saw was an elderly usher, his back to me, slowly pushing a broom across the ornate, threadbare carpet as if performing a sacred, meaningless ritual. I was there for a late showing of some forgettable horror movie, the kind with a derivative ghost and predictable jump scares. I bought my popcorn from the sullen girl at the concession stand, the source of that odd, sweet smell, and a large soda that felt like an anchor in my hand. The corridor to Auditorium 4 was a journey from the faded grandeur of the lobby into the stark, utilitarian bowels of the building. The carpet changed from intricate patterns to a plain, dark blue, and the walls were bare cinder block, painted a dismal gray. The only light came from flickering sconces that cast long, dancing shadows. I pushed open the heavy door to Auditorium 4 and was met with a wall of profound darkness and a deep, resonant silence. The previews hadn't started yet. The screen was a vast black rectangle, and the air was cold, much colder than the lobby. It felt like stepping into a walk-in refrigerator. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. Using the dim, floor-level emergency lights as a guide, I navigated the steeply sloped aisle. The seats were old, velour-covered, and let out a sigh of trapped air when you sat in them. I chose my usual spot, dead center about halfway up. The perfect viewing angle. I placed my soda in the cup holder and balanced the popcorn tub on my lap, the strange smell now a personal cloud. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with a pang of disappointment that I wasn't alone. A single figure sat in the very front row, so close his head was craned back at an unnatural angle. He was perfectly still. A weirdo, I thought, a little uncharitably. But then, wasn't I the guy sitting alone in a near-empty theater on a Tuesday night? I pushed the thought away and settled in, the silence pressing in on me. It was absolute. I couldn't hear the hum of the projector, the distant traffic, or even the rustle of my own clothes. It was as if the room was soundproofed, sealed off from the world. The silence was broken by a sudden, sharp crack from the front. My heart jumped. I peered into the gloom. The man in the front row had moved. His head was no longer tilted back. It was now turned, his profile visible in the gloom. He seemed to be looking at the empty seat beside him. Then he did it again. He leaned forward and sharply tapped the empty seat in front of him. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was impossibly loud in the stillness. My skin prickled. What was he doing? Was he waiting for someone? Was he mentally unwell? Before I could dwell on it, the theater went completely black for a moment, and then the previews exploded onto the screen with a blare of sound that made me flinch. The sudden sensory assault was a relief. I focused on the bright, loud trailers, trying to lose myself in the manufactured excitement. But my attention kept drifting back to the man in the front row. He was perfectly still again, a dark cutout against the flickering light of the screen. He didn't react to the trailers at all. No shifting in his seat, no lifting a hand to eat popcorn. Nothing. About 15 minutes into the main feature, a hand gripped my shoulder. I yelped, a short, sharp sound lost in a sudden burst of on-screen music. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. The seats behind me were empty, row after row receding into the darkness. There was no one there. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, washed over me. I could still feel the phantom pressure of the hand, cold, Firm, the fingers distinct. It hadn't been an accident, a brush from a passerby. It was a deliberate grip. My first rational thought was that the elderly usher had come in to check on something and had mistaken me for someone else, but the aisle behind me was empty. The door at the top of the aisle was closed. There was no way anyone could have touched me and disappeared that quickly. I sat rigid, my back pressed into the velour seat, the movie forgotten. Every nerve ending was on high alert. The popcorn smell was now nauseating. I considered leaving, just getting up and walking out, but a stubborn, foolish part of me refused. It was your imagination, it whispered. A muscle spasm, a trick of the mind. Don't let a little spookiness ruin your night. I tried to focus on the movie, but the images seemed to warp. The ghost on screen, a pale woman with long black hair, seemed to be looking past the actors, her dark eyes seeming to fix directly on me. The dialogue became muffled, as if heard through water, while the scarier sounds, the creaking doors, the whispers, the sudden stings of music felt amplified, sharper, as if they were happening not just on screen, but in the room with me. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was part of the movie's soundtrack, a common trope in horror films. But this was different. The whispers weren't coming from the speakers. They seemed to originate from the empty seats around me, a soft, sibilant hiss, just on the edge of hearing. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, a mixture of curiosity and malice. I strained my ears, turning my head slightly. The whispering stopped. When I settled back, it started again, a little louder now, seeming to come from the seat directly to my left, which was empty. My breath hitched. I was frozen. I slowly, deliberately reached for my phone in my pocket. My plan was to use its light, to break the oppressive gloom and prove to myself that I was alone. My fingers closed around the cold plastic. I pulled it out, my thumb finding the power button. The screen remained black. I pressed it again, held it down. Nothing. The battery had been at half charge when I left home. There was no reason for it to be dead. A soft, wet, crunching sound came from my lap. I looked down. The popcorn tub was still balanced there. In the flickering light from the screen, I saw something move within it. My stomach lurched. I carefully, with a trembling hand, reached into the tub and pulled out a handful. It wasn't popcorn. It was a jumble of small, hard objects. I brought my hand closer to my face, the light from the movie screen catching them. They were teeth. Human teeth. Small like a child's milk teeth, and larger molars, some stained. Some pristine white. They were mixed in with what looked like slivers of bone and fragments of what might have been fingernails. I gasped and flung the handful away from me, the tiny teeth scattering across the velour seats and the sticky floor with a sound like falling gravel. I shoved the entire tub off my lap. It tumbled to the floor, spilling its grotesque contents. I wiped my hand frantically on my jeans, a scream trapped in my throat. The cloying, meaty smell of the popcorn now made a horrific, sickening sense. That was it. The line had been crossed. Rationality, stubbornness, pride, all of it evaporated in a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. I had to get out, now. I stood up, my legs wobbly. The movie continued to play. The images now completely nonsensical, a swirl of light and shadow that made my head spin. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, now coming from all around me. I could almost make out words. Stay, watch, see. I stumbled into the aisle, my hand gripping the seat backs for support. I started making my way up the steep slope towards the door, a rectangle of faint light from the corridor beyond. It seemed a mile away. The air grew colder with every step, my breath pluming in front of my face. The whispering was a chorus now. 100 hissing voices filling the auditorium, drowning out the sound from the movie. I risked a glance back towards the front. The man in the front row was standing now. He was turned around, facing me. His features were indistinct in the darkness, but I could see he was tall and unnaturally thin. And he was smiling, a wide, placid smile that didn't reach the shadows where his eyes should have been. He lifted one long, pale hand and pointed, not at me, but at the screen. Against my better judgment, I followed his gesture. The movie had changed. It was no longer the generic horror film I had paid to see. The image on the screen was now the interior of this very theater, filmed from the perspective of the projection booth. I could see the rows of seats, the emergency lights, the silhouette of the thin man in the front, and me. I was standing in the aisle, frozen, looking back at the screen. It was a live feed. As I watched, my on-screen self turned its head slowly towards the camera, its face a mask of terror. But I wasn't turning my head. I was staring straight ahead. The disconnect was dizzying. My on-screen image then began to move, not up the aisle towards the door, but down deeper into the theater, towards the front. It walked with a stiff, jerky gait like a marionette. A cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. If I didn't get out before my on-screen self reached the front, I never would. I turned and ran, no longer caring about grace or silence. My shoes slapped against the carpet, the sound swallowed by the rising tide of whispers. The door seemed to recede, a nightmare effect of moving without getting anywhere. I could feel things brushing against my legs, cold, insubstantial touches like trailing cobwebs. The air grew thick, resistant, as if I were wading through water. I didn't look back. I didn't look at the screen. I focused everything I had on that door. With a final desperate lunge, my hand closed around the cold metal of the push bar. I shoved. The door didn't budge. Panic, pure and blinding, seized me. I threw my shoulder against it again and again. It was locked, or something was holding it shut from the other side. I was trapped. The whispers became a cacophony, a deafening roar of static and hissing voices. I could feel a presence behind me, getting closer, the air freezing around it. In a last frantic act, I turned and slammed my back against the door facing the theater. The thin man was gone from the front row. The screen now showed a close-up of the door from the inside, with me pressed against it. My face, wide-eyed and pale, filled the massive screen. And then, from the darkness of the aisles to my left and right, figures began to rise. They emerged from the seats I had thought were empty. They were shadows given form, silhouettes that peeled themselves from the velour and stood, turning their featureless heads towards me. They began to shuffle into the aisle, blocking my path, a slow, inexorable advance. This was it. This was how it ended. In a forgotten cinema on a Tuesday night, a snack for whatever haunted this place. My hand, scrambling behind me for any purchase, found the push bar again. In a fit of hopeless rage, I slammed my fist against it. And this time, with a loud, mundane clunk, the door gave way. I fell backward into the bright, harshly lit corridor, landing hard on my backside. The sound of the movie and the whispers cut off instantly, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant, tinny music from the lobby. The cold was gone. The air was warm and stale. I scrambled to my feet, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I stared at the closed door of Auditorium 4. It was just a door, plain and unassuming. I half expected it to burst open, for the shadows to come pouring out. But it remained shut. I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted down the corridor, through the grand lobby where the pimpled kid and the sullen girl were still, glued to their phones, and the elderly usher was still slowly pushing his broom, and out into the blessedly cold, fresh night air. I didn't stop running until I was 2 blocks away, leaning against a brick wall, gulping down great lungfuls of air, the reality of the city sounds, cars, sirens, distant laughter, a symphony of sanity. I took a cab home, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I spent the rest of the night with every light in my apartment blazing, jumping at every creak and groan of the building. The next day, in the clear, rational light of the afternoon, I tried to dismiss it. A panic attack, perhaps? A waking dream fueled by heartbreak and a creepy atmosphere. The popcorn? It must have been a prank. Kids putting weird stuff in the tubs. The hand on my shoulder, a muscle spasm. The phone, a coincidental battery failure. The whispers, my mind playing tricks with the soundtrack. I constructed a flimsy but serviceable fortress of logic around the experience, but a part of me knew. I knew what I had felt, what I had seen, what I had held in my hand. A week later, driven by a morbid need for closure, I went back to the grandiose. I had to see it in the daylight to prove to myself it was just a building. The sun was shining and the street was bustling with people. The theater looked even more dilapidated in the light, its marquee letters faded and missing. I walked inside. The same pimpled kid was at the ticket booth. The same elderly usher was there, standing motionless in the center of the lobby, Not sweeping, just staring off into space. I approached the usher. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding too loud. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were a pale, milky blue clouded with cataracts. He was blind. "Yes?" he said, his voice a dry rustle. I was here last Tuesday." "In Auditorium 4. I struggled to find the right words. "There was an incident. A man in the front row, very tall and thin. Did you see anyone like that leave?" The old usher's milky eyes seemed to look right through me. A faint, knowing smile touched his wrinkled lips. "Ah," he rasped. "You saw him." "The Critic!" The Critic?" "He's a regular," the usher said, turning his head back to face the empty lobby. "He's very particular. He only comes for the sad stories, the lonely ones. He says they have the most flavor." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "What does that mean?" The usher didn't answer my question directly. Instead, he said, "This place, it was built on a foundation of stories. Not all of them want to end. Some get stuck in the walls, in the seats. They feed on new ones. They get hungry." He gestured vaguely with his broom towards the corridor leading to the auditoriums. "Auditorium 4. That's where they put the reels for the lost, the broken-hearted, the ones who come here alone. It's always been that way. The Critic, he just helps them along. He sets the stage." I felt the world tilt around me. "The popcorn, the teeth." The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Concession has its own special recipes. Always has. Makes the experience more immersive, don't you think?" I backed away from him, my skin crawling. The rational world I had tried so hard to rebuild shattered into a million pieces. It was all real, every terrifying second of it. "I have to go," I mumbled. The usher nodded. "Of course, but you should know. He liked your story. He said it had a particularly poignant bitterness. He'll be waiting for the next chapter." I fled the grandiose for the last time. I never went to another cinema again. I moved apartments, got a new phone number, and eventually, after a long time, started dating again. I married a wonderful woman, had kids. I built a good, normal, happy life on the surface. But sometimes on a quiet Tuesday night, when the house is still and I'm alone with my thoughts, I'll catch a faint, cloying scent on the air, like overly sweet popcorn. Or I'll hear a whisper from an empty room, a sibilant hiss that sounds like "Stay, watch, see." And I'll feel a cold spot in the air beside me, a phantom pressure on my shoulder, a reminder that some stories don't have endings. They just have intermissions. And the Critic, wherever he is always waiting in the dark, ready for the show to resume. I should have never gone to that theater alone. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again.